Welcome to APD iConnect, Provider Tips and Tricks. In this video, we are going to give an overview of multi-factor authentication, or ID Pass, agency staff training, advantages of using your My Dashboard in APD iConnect, how to locate your provider enrollment QA workstream worker contact person, APD iConnect e-learning library, switching and understanding the roles in APD iConnect, the view of a provider record versus a consumer record, electronic visit verification or EVV, how to assign and unassign a worker to an EVV service authorization. Please see full EVV e-learning resources on the APD Provider e-learning library at www.apdcares.org. We are going to cover how to use filters to search for authorizations in the provider record, where to manually enter a service log. See adding a service log in APD iConnect on the Provider e-learning library at www.apdcares.org. How to use filters to search for authorizations when adding a service log, and how to copy and paste service log entry notes from Word documents into your provider documentation record. The service provider enters into APD iConnect in the service provider role. For agency owners, employees are added as workers into APD iConnect through your multi-factor authentication ID Pass account. Employees will appear under the Worker tab within your provider record. However, they will not appear until they complete all the steps and log in to APD iConnect for the first time. It is important to remember that the multi-factor authentication email request that is sent is time sensitive. So employees need to respond and complete all the steps as soon as possible so that the system can complete the registration process. Once an employee logs into APD iConnect through the ID Pass account, they will appear as a worker, and all of their information is already pre-populated into APD iConnect. The service provider can simply click into the account to access the record and update any information accordingly. File, save and close worker. Agency owners are responsible for training their employees on activities related to delivery of services in APD iConnect. Just a few tips. Remember, roles are very specific as to what the employee can and cannot do. So that is one way to have a small group setting based on the specific roles that the employees have. You can also think about grouping like expertise together. So if you have a group of employees who are very computer savvy, you might group them together. Whereas if you have some of us who take a little bit more time with the computer, you can group them together. Remember to send your ID Pass requests to your employees at least 2 days in advance. This will allow the staff to complete the steps, log in, and appear under the Worker tab in APD iConnect. The agency owner, you can then go in, do the EVV scheduling to assign the employees to consumers, and therefore make the most of your training time. When the service provider enters into APD iConnect, the chapter that you land on is your My Dashboard. Your My Dashboard is your home page and where you can manage your overall agency. Your My Dashboard has information for the consumers, for you as a provider, and a task column, which has an opportunity for you to get to the APD website, as well as the overall management of your record. For the consumer, depending on what it is, your My Dashboard will hold notes that are particular to the consumer. It may hold ticklers, which are actions that you have to look at, perhaps complete for a consumer. Any appointments, authorizations also are on the consumer column. And so what that means is on your My Dashboard, you can see all of your authorizations or all of the consumers who you have authorizations for without entering into each consumer individual record. For example, this shows that I have 55 fully approved authorizations. When I click into the authorizations, in the left-hand corner, it says 55 authorizations of record, now viewing 1 through 15, because the default number for the page is 15. However, you can change that number by highlighting and entering into this box and clicking next, and then you have whatever number you put in that box is displayed on the page. So here is an opportunity for me to see that I have authorizations without having to go into this consumer account and that consumer account and this consumer account. The other thing that you want to notice about your My Dashboard is the numbers. So at this moment, this says that I have 55 fully approved authorizations. You may walk away from your desk or come back on the next day, and that might say 65. That's your indication that you have 10 additional authorizations or whatever the number is. And so that's how your My Dashboard gives you an overview. The same criteria is under the provider column. If there are any things that are particular to you as a provider that you need to follow through with, it will post under the provider column. On your My Dashboard, you have chapters, and each chapter gives you the opportunity to go into a particular record. For example, you only have your provider record. So when you go to your provider chapter from your My Dashboard, it will pull up your provider record. Of course, at this time, we're not doing claims or the scheduler, but for the consumer, if you click on the consumer chapter, this is where you can put in an individual consumer's number or name, however you wish to search for the consumer, making sure that the last column corresponds to how you're searching. I'm searching by the iConnect ID. And when you click go, it will bring up that consumer record either by opening the consumer record or displaying the consumer record in a list view, and you click into it anywhere in the white box and it will open the consumer area. So on your My Dashboard, your overview, the consumer chapter, individual consumer records, the provider chapter, your provider record. You're in iConnect and you're looking for information on the website, you don't have to go to another page. You click on iConnect eLearning Library. And it brings you to the main page, which is APD iConnect Learning Resources. These are resources that are resources for everyone who uses APD iConnect. You'll notice the manuals, the e-learning modules, you have documents, things that everyone would use for APD iConnect, such as notes. Important links are the frequently asked questions. When you click on APD iConnect, frequently asked questions, they're by category. So for providers, all of the frequently asked questions are categorized. Is it an access question? Is it a question about authorizations? So on and so forth. And when you click into a question, it will give you the answer to the question. If you want to go back to the frequently asked questions main page, you can click here and it's going to take you back. The other link on the eLearning library is APD iConnect System Enhancements. These are categorized by month, and it displays what are the system updates that have occurred in APD iConnect that affect the users. You'll notice in October, on October the 22nd, the increase in respite rates and updates to plan services, budget, and authorizations are now reflected in the system, which is the production site. So if you had a question of, or you know that the respite rates increased and you're not sure if that increase has populated into the live site, this tells you that that update was put into the live site on October the 22nd. So you want to regularly visit the APD iConnect Systems Enhancements and Updates link. The other link that is for you is the provider library. Here are your provider resources: the training guide, the e-learning modules, the documents such as adding a service log, and you'll notice that if a document or anything on the pages are updated, they will have updated with the new date in parentheses in red. Outside of the system, you just go to apdcares.org to the waiver APD iConnect page, and you'll get the same results. Because this is a site outside of APD iConnect, if you go to the e-learning library through iConnect, you can close it simply by clicking on the X, and you go back onto your My Dashboard in APD iConnect. One of the other links on your My Dashboard is the iConnect Help Desk. When you're in APD iConnect and you may be having an issue and you need to contact the help desk, by clicking on that link, it will give you the phone number that you can call to get help. The service provider enters APD iConnect, and it is important to know who at APD is your point of contact. Your point of contact is called your QA workstream worker. And when you enter into APD iConnect, if you click on the provider chapter, it goes to the Provider tab. Along the left side is your QA workstream worker. If you had a question for provider enrollment or needed assistance of provider enrollment at APD, your QA workstream worker would be the person that you would contact. And they would be able to either assist you or direct you accordingly. Now, your QA workstream worker is not the person who will necessarily help you to navigate through iConnect. If you have a question about a functionality in iConnect, that is still sending an email to iConnect@apdcares.org or calling the iConnect support desk. As an agency owner or solo provider, your default role in APD iConnect is the service provider role. Remember, in APD iConnect, each role performs different functions. There's things that you can see in one role. You can do the function in that role. In another role, you might be able to see it, but you can't do the function, or it may not be available to you at all, depending on the role that you're in. The service provider role is the role that allows you to see your agency record or your record as a solo provider. Under the provider chapter, your agency record, from those who work for you to your credentials to all of the information associated with your agency, is under the service provider role. The service provider role should be limited to only you and designated staff who you have authorized in writing to act on your behalf. Other roles that are available to service providers is the provider EVV manager role. Remember, in APD iConnect, when you switch roles, you choose the role from the dropdown and you click Go to activate the role. You will notice in most roles, your visual is different. So if you are trying to do a particular function or access a particular tab and it's not available in the role that you're in, the first thing you want to think about is, am I in the correct role? Under the Provider EVV Manager role, you have access to your provider record, but it's more streamlined. You'll notice there's less tabs. You can see your authorizations, and you have access to EVV scheduling, EVV activities, and you'll also be able to submit EVV claims under the Provider EVV Manager role. You can access the consumer individual records by entering the consumer information. And you have your My Dashboard. You'll notice as a provider EVV manager, your My Dashboard is different from the service provider role. The service provider QA admin role, again, choose the role and click Go. Your QA admin role has some access to portions of your provider record. So under the provider chapter, the access that they have gives them the opportunity to do what their role is. Most service provider QA administrators are support for agency management. So they can edit provider demographics, complete forms and notes. They can assign supervisors for employees and submit and view claims. They can also access individual consumer records, and they have a My Dashboard. You'll see the service provider QA admin role under the provider column. They have access to the provider information or things that the provider might have to do because they serve in the capacity as support. The additional role that service providers have access to is the billing agent. The billing agent role is for persons who will submit claims on your behalf, and they can be a third party or an employee. Now notice the dashboard for a billing agent. They don't have any access to the provider information from their My Dashboard. They have very limited access to the agency as a whole. So under the provider chapter, the billing agent has what they need to process and or submit claims, and they can add notes. They have no access to consumer records. The final role is the service provider worker role. The service provider worker role cannot see the agency record at all. You'll notice they don't have a provider chapter. They have access to the consumer records for the consumers for whom you have an authorization. And access is limited to the information needed to deliver authorized services and add documentation. They can also add notes for the WSC to see because it's in the consumer record. And this is the role that is needed for all EVV workers. EVV scheduling is where the service provider will assign or unassign EVV workers to EVV service authorizations. In APD iConnect, you must be in the service provider role and access your provider record by clicking on the provider chapter and the EVV scheduling tab. In the EVV scheduling tab, all of the authorizations will be listed that are associated with the provider. The EVV scheduling allows the provider to assign the authorization for the consumers to specific EVV workers. The process to assign, unassign, or change is the same. To assign a EVV worker to an authorization associated with a consumer, the provider needs to first indicate which consumer they want to do the function for. You indicate that by placing a check in the box next to the consumer. You go to File, Assign Change EVV Worker. In APD iConnect, you have the opportunity to assign 5 EVV workers to a particular consumer authorization. The primary worker is the EVV worker who is primarily the person who takes care of the consumer. The backup worker is the worker who will take care of the consumer when the primary worker is not available. And you also have 3 alternate workers. There's no particular hierarchy to the alternate workers. This just allows you to assign 3 additional for a total of 5 workers to a consumer. Once you have chosen assign or change the EVV worker, you indicate the worker role. In this instance, we're going to choose primary EVV worker, and you indicate that by placing a mark in the circle. The worker is a list of workers that works for the agency. If a worker does not display here, they have not logged into APD iConnect through ID Pass. So the service provider needs to ensure that they do that for them to be displayed. You choose the worker that you'll assign to this consumer. And once you choose the worker, you'll notice that the start date and the end date appears. If the dates are populated, they are used to grant or remove visibility to the consumer within the mobile site. If no dates are populated, the assigned EVV worker will always be able to see the consumer in the mobile site. It is highly recommended that you choose a start date. You do not have to choose an end date unless it's a specific period of time. Say, for instance, this particular worker is going to work with the consumer for 60 days. So you would have a definitive start date and a definitive end date. In our instance, we do not have an end date, so we'll choose a start date. Once you choose the start date, visibility of the EVV services in the mobile site is available to that worker. You click Update Records. It will give you a message that says you are about to assign this worker in this role to the consumer. You click OK. And then it's going to say that your records are successfully updated. Click OK. And now you'll notice this worker who did not have a primary worker before now has a primary EV worker assigned with the effective date of November the 17th. You'll notice there are primary workers already assigned to the other consumers. However, let's say we want to change the primary worker. You indicate that by placing a check in the box, going to File, Assign or Change EVV Worker. You choose the role. In this instance, let's say we want to replace that primary worker with a different worker. We choose Primary EVV Worker. Choose the name of the worker who's now going to be the primary worker. We indicate a start date and click Update Records. You'll get the same messages confirming that you want to do what you're doing. And now you'll notice the primary worker for that consumer has changed with an effective date of the date that was indicated. Now, let's say we want to assign a backup worker to any of the consumers. I want you to keep in mind, in APD iConnect, if you are assigning a PV worker to a group of consumers, their authorizations, you can choose multiple consumers at the same time. So for all three of these consumers, if I wanted to choose a backup worker, I would place a check in the box, go to File, Assign Change EVV Worker, choose Backup Worker, choose the name of the backup worker who will be working with these consumers, choose an effective start date, and click Update Records. Now you'll notice each consumer has a plus sign next to their name. You see the primary worker and the start date. Beneath the plus sign are any of the other additional workers that you have assigned to the consumer, and everyone who is assigned to the consumer will have access to that authorization in the EVV mobile site. So the backup worker, the effective date for that consumer. And so if you have multiple persons, each person's name will be listed below the plus sign and will have access to perform EVV activities that are authorized for the consumer. As a service provider, one of the best tools that you have in iConnect is associated with your authorizations and using the filter to search through your authorizations. Many of you have a large number of authorizations, and using the filter will allow you to find what you want more quickly or streamline your list so that you can locate the authorization or type of authorizations that you might be looking for. To access your authorizations, go to the Provider chapter and click on the Authorizations tab. You'll notice under Authorizations, you have a filter, and you can add fields to the filter. Remember, filters work the same throughout APD iConnect. Each filter options, they're dictated by what category you're under. In this instance, we are under authorizations, so our filter fields respond to authorizations. If we were under notes, our field would respond to the filters that would help to locate notes. So you add a filter field by clicking on the plus sign. So in this instance, let's say we want to search for a consumer. Choose the consumer filter. You add a plus sign to expand and enter information in. The center field, we choose accordingly, whether it begins with, ends with, is equal to. You just choose the one that is going to work best for you. In this instance, I'm going to choose contains. When you're searching by a consumer, you always use the last name. So it wouldn't be Joe, it would be Joe's last name, which would be David. So consumer contains, you'll notice I'm just putting in a few letters. So that's my first parameter. And say I want to add another one. So you choose the filter. Perhaps I'm looking by a case number or an auth ID or an authorization start date. you choose the filter that is going to give you what you're looking for. So I'm going to choose a case number, click the plus sign to expand, and I'm going to put equal to 78485. Once you've entered all of your search parameters, you click search, and you'll notice APD iConnect narrowed it down to my consumer whose last name has these 5 characters and whose case number is equal to the case number that I entered. That is how you use filters to search for your authorizations. And you'll see your list of fields is extensive: max amount, max units. Once you have pulled a filter, you have to click reset. Refresh the page by clicking on any other tab. Go back to the tab that you were on, in this instance, authorizations, and that refresh works the same throughout APD iConnect. And now you see it has displayed my full list of authorizations again. To manually enter a service log, the service provider must enter APD iConnect and be in the service provider role. Manual service log entries are done under the Provider Documentation tab in the consumer record. In the e-learning library or at apdcares.org, there is the full process of manually entering a service log in the document entitled Adding a Service Log in APD iConnect. For this demonstration, I'm going to concentrate on how to use filters to search for your authorizations when manually adding a service log. To manually add the service log, you enter the consumer record by going to the consumer chapter and entering the consumer information to pull up the consumer record. Click on the Provider Documentation tab. File, Add Provider Documentation. After entering the service, start time and end time, and also verifying the start date, remember, if you change your date, make sure that you change the start date and the end date. Now that we've entered the start and end time, we click Add. And the next step is to pull in the auth ID for the service that we are documenting. You click on the ellipsis, and you'll notice it doesn't give me any information. Should you get this screen without having the authorizations pre-populated, you want to change the provider filter from equal to contains. The agency, your agency, will auto-populate. And click Search. The auth status contains approved will stay the same. It will give you the results of all the authorizations. To maximize your time, remember, if you just click into the provider information, you will have to click again to complete the service code fields within provider documentation. However, if you open the plus sign and click into the authorization itself. The authorization will populate all of the other areas in the provider documentation, including the activity service, and you will proceed to complete the provider documentation accordingly. To complete the provider documentation, you would indicate on the left-hand side that it's a service log by highlighting it and using the arrow to push it to the right-hand side. Remember, without it being in the right-hand side, the provider documentation isn't going to recognize that as a field that is completed, and it's mandatory. For the notes, you have 50,000 characters that you can enter provider service log notes in. However, you also have the ability to copy and paste your documents that you are using to record information directly into the service log area. You'll notice I copied the documentation that I used to provide the service for the consumer directly into the notes field of the provider documentation. You also have the ability to change, highlight, or in other words, emphasize what you may want to emphasize in the notes area by using the tools attached to the provider documentation area. Once you have completed provider documentation, file, save and close provider documentation. Resources and reference material, such as frequently asked questions, e-learning videos, training manuals, and quick reference guides are located at apdcares.org, the e-learning library. If you get stuck, the APD iConnect support desk has hours Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Their contact number is 1-800-353-5168, and they are there to help you with iConnect support. We also have a dedicated email, iConnect@apdcares.org. You can email here if you have questions or need direction as to which way to go to resolve an issue with iConnect. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.